The transmission arrived without a header. This was the first wrong thing. Every diplomatic communication in the Compact's 700-year framework of interstellar protocol carried an authentication header, sender identification, origin coordinates, transmission timestamp, encryption tier. The absence of a header was not a technical error. It was not a corrupted packet or a relay malfunction. It was a choice. Someone had sent this transmission deliberately stripped of everything that would identify them, which meant someone wanted the content received without the context, and that distinction, in the Compact's diplomatic architecture, carried the specific weight of a weapon presented grip first. Signals analyst Vorithkes received it at 0340 station time, during the shift that most of her colleagues considered the worst assignment in the rotation and that she had spent 6 years volunteering for because the quiet allowed her to think. She read the content. She read it again. Then she sat very still in the signals room for approximately 90 seconds, which was not how she normally processed incoming transmissions, and then she did something she had never done in 6 years of night shift work. She called the warden directly. She called because the transmission contained 3 sentences. The first sentence identified the origin of the transmission as an Imperial courier vessel operating in the contested boundary corridor between the Compact's eastern edge and the Drath Empire's territorial limit. The second sentence stated that the vessel had completed its assigned mission. The third sentence said, Envoy Lien Su will not be returning. Vorithkes had processed thousands of transmissions. She understood, with the particular literacy of someone who had spent 6 years reading the space between words, that will not be returning was doing something very specific in that sentence. Not has been delayed. Not was unable to complete transit. Not encountered complications. The phrasing was exact. Final. The phrasing of someone reporting a completed action rather than an interrupted journey. The Compact's human envoy to the Drath Empire, the sole diplomatic presence maintained across the 700-year ceasefire, had been killed, and the people who killed her had chosen to announce it in 3 sentences with no header, which meant they were not hiding what they had done. They were presenting it. They wanted it received and understood and responded to, and the absence of the header was not an oversight but a statement. We are not offering you the framework of diplomatic communication for this message because what we are telling you is not diplomatic. Vorithkes had the warden on the line in 40 seconds and gave her the content verbatim. The warden was silent for a moment that stretched past the comfortable length of a pause and into the territory of something else. Confirm no authentication header, the warden said. Confirmed. Confirm the courier vessel ID in the content is a registered Imperial vessel. Cross-referenced. The vessel is registered to the Empire's 3rd Diplomatic Courier Fleet. It's a legitimate ID. Vorithkes paused. They used a real vessel registration in a headerless transmission. They're not trying to obscure the source. They're just refusing to use protocol. Another silence. Who else has seen this? No one. I'm the only analyst on this channel tonight. Keep it that way until I reach the communications center, the warden said. 14 minutes. The call ended. Vorithkes sat in the signals room and looked at the 3 sentences on her screen and thought about the thing she hadn't said on the call, the thing that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the first reading. She hadn't said it because it was speculative, and she was a signals analyst, and her job was to report content accurately and let the people with authority make interpretive decisions. She hadn't said it because it was possible she was wrong, and being wrong about this would be worse than not saying it. She also hadn't said it because she wasn't wrong, and she knew she wasn't wrong, and the knowledge of it was sitting in her chest with the cold weight of something that cannot be set down. Lien Su had been the Compact's human envoy for 11 years. In 11 years, she had filed 342 diplomatic contact reports, and Vorithkes had received and logged every one of them because the human diplomatic channel ran through the night shift signals desk, and Vorithkes had been the night shift analyst for 6 of those 11 years. She had read all 342 reports, some of them multiple times, because Lien Su wrote the way certain people write when they have something worth saying and enough precision to say it without waste, and Vorithkes had found herself returning to specific passages the way she returned to things that mattered. She knew, from those reports, that Lien Su had understood something about the Drath Empire that the Compact's strategic analysts had consistently underestimated. She knew this because Lien Su had said it, plainly, in report after report, in language that the analysts had apparently filed without fully absorbing. What she hadn't known until this moment was whether the Empire had understood it too. The warden arrived in 13 minutes, which meant she had run at least part of the way, which meant the 14 minutes she'd given Vorithkes as an estimate had been the outside number and she had pushed against it. She was a Serenthi named Warden Orvithsal, and she had been in her position for 9 years, and she read the transmission on Vorithkes's screen with the expression of someone who has been briefed on a possibility and is now confronting the reality and finding that the briefing did not fully prepare them. "The Empire has broken the ceasefire," she said. "Not a question. The act predates the announcement," Vorithkes said. "The courier vessel has already completed its assignment. Whatever happened to Envoy Su happened before this transmission was sent." Orvithsal looked at her. "How long before?" "The courier vessel's last registered position in the boundary corridor was 11 days ago. Transit time from there to our receiving array is approximately 8 days at standard courier speed." Vorithkes held the warden's gaze. "It happened at least 3 days ago. Probably more. And they waited to tell us." "They didn't wait," Vorithkes said. "The transmission was sent immediately. The transit time is just the physics." She paused. "They killed her and sent the message in the same operational window. They wanted us to know. They just also wanted 11 days to pass first." Orvithsal stood in the signals room, and the silence she held had a very particular quality, the silence of a senior official doing multiple calculations simultaneously and arriving at results that compound rather than resolve. "I need to know," she said, "before I wake the council and start a process that cannot be stopped once started, is there any interpretation of this transmission other than what it appears to be?" Vorithkes had spent 90 minutes with the 3 sentences before making the call. She had applied every alternative reading she could construct. She said simply, "No." Orvithsal left to wake the council. Vorithkes remained at her desk and pulled up Lien Su's contact reports from the last 6 months. Not because she had a professional reason to, because she needed to understand what had just been lost, and the reports were what she had. The most recent one was dated 43 days ago. It was 7 pages, which was long by Lien Su standards. She typically wrote 3 to 4 pages, precise and complete, nothing excessive. The additional length came from a section at the end that Vorithkes had flagged when she first received it and had been waiting to see whether anyone in the analytical division would pick up on. No one had commented. The section described a shift in the Empire's internal political structure, a consolidation of authority in a faction that Lien Su identified as the Successor Council, a body that had been peripheral in the Empire's governance architecture for decades and had moved, over the previous 18 months, from peripheral to central. She described this shift with the care of someone documenting something they believe is important and are not sure their audience understands why. Then, in the report's final paragraph, she had written a single sentence that Vorithkes had read 4 times when it arrived and had not been able to fully interpret. "The Successor Council does not believe the ceasefire serves them. They may be correct that it does not. What they do not yet understand is the cost of ending it." Vorithkes read it again now. "What they do not yet understand is the cost of ending it." She thought about the 3 sentences in the headerless transmission. She thought about an envoy who had seen this coming and had tried to say so in the diplomatic language of a contact report that no one with authority had read carefully enough. She thought about the cost Lien Su had meant. She did not yet know what it was, specifically. But she had read 342 reports from a woman who spent 11 years inside the Empire's diplomatic sphere, who had understood something about the relationship between humans and the ceasefire that the Compact's analysts had not, and who had, in her final report, chosen to note that the cost of ending it was something the Empire did not yet understand. Not something the Compact didn't understand. Something the Empire didn't. That distinction was doing something, and Vorithkes needed to understand what. She began reading the reports from the beginning. She had read them all before. She was reading them again with different eyes, looking for the thread, the thing Lien Su had been building across 11 years of diplomatic contact that she had chosen never to state directly because a direct statement in a diplomatic report carries a different weight than an accumulated understanding, and Lien Su had been, above all things, precise about weight. The council convened at 0530. Vorith Kess was not in the chamber, but she had access to the signal's feed, and she listened to the first hour of the session while reading reports, moving through years of Lien Su's careful documentation with the attention she had never given them all at once before because there had never been a reason to read them all at once before. The council's first hour was the expected hour. The procedural acknowledgement of the ceasefire breach, the formal identification of the violation under the Compact's foundational charter, the preliminary discussion of response options ranging from diplomatic protest through economic sanction to military mobilization. It was the hour of people doing what institutions do when they have been struck, cataloging the wound before deciding what to do about it. At the 90-minute mark, someone in the chamber said something that Vorith Kess heard and immediately set her reports down. A counselor whose name she recognized as representing the Human Integration Division said, in the particular tone of someone who has been waiting to speak and has finally been given the floor, "Before the council proceeds to response options, I need to introduce information that changes the frame of this discussion." The pause. "The floor is yours," said the session chair. "The Compact's Human Integration Division has been in contact with the Earth Governance Council since 0400, the counselor said. "When Earth received our preliminary notification of the envoy's death, the Earth Council did not request a response briefing. They did not ask for a strategic assessment. They asked one question." He paused. "They asked how long we needed to move our vessels out of the boundary corridor." Silence in the chamber. "They're not asking what we're going to do," another counselor said slowly. "They're asking when they can start." "Yes," the Human Integration Counselor said. "And I want this council to understand what that means before we select a response framework. Because the Earth Council's question implies that they have already selected their own response framework, and that framework does not include waiting for compact authorization." Vorith Kess had stopped reading the reports, but she found herself reaching for them again now. She went to the final paragraph of Lien Su's last report. "What they do not yet understand is the cost of ending it." She read it again. Then she went back further, to a report from 3 years ago, one she had flagged for a different reason at the time and was now reading with new eyes. In that report, Lien Su had spent 4 pages describing a cultural misunderstanding she had observed during a formal imperial reception. An imperial official had made a comment, intended as a slight, about human diplomatic presence in the Empire's sphere, characterizing it as a gesture of weakness, the Compact sending its smallest, newest species as an envoy, as though no serious investment were being made. Lien Su had recorded the comment and then written, in her characteristically careful way, "The official's interpretation is structurally incorrect in a way that will matter if the Empire ever acts on it. Human diplomatic presence in the Empire is not a gesture of minimum investment. It is the opposite. The Compact sends a human envoy because the ceasefire means more to the humans than to any other member species. 700 years ago, this corridor was the site of the only military engagement the humans participated in before Compact membership. The ceasefire ended something that had begun to define them. They have been maintaining this relationship with more personal investment than anyone in the Imperial Court has been told, because humans do not announce their most serious commitments. They simply keep them." Vorith Kess set the report down. She picked up her comm and called the warden. Orvithsal answered from the council chamber's side corridor, which meant she had stepped out, which meant she had been expecting the call or a call like it. "I've been reading the reports," Vorith Kess said. "All of them. From the beginning." "And?" "The Empire killed the envoy because they believed they were eliminating a minor diplomatic presence. A low-cost signal. They thought they were breaking a ceasefire maintained by the Compact's least significant member, and they thought the response would be scaled to match." She paused. "They killed the wrong person in the wrong place for a reason that was based on a complete misunderstanding of what the human diplomatic presence actually represented." "What did it represent?" Orvithsal said. "A promise," Vorith Kess said. 11 years of uninterrupted contact, through every political difficulty, through the Empire's internal consolidation, through every moment when the Compact's other member species were reducing their engagement with the Empire because the relationship had become costly. The humans never reduced their engagement. They maintained it at personal cost, with personal investment, through a single envoy who spent 11 years in a posting that no other species diplomat had managed to hold for more than 3. She paused. The Empire interpreted consistency as insignificance. They thought, because the humans never made their investment visible, that the investment was small. Orvithsal said nothing for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had changed. What does the Earth Council's question actually mean? About moving our vessels out of the boundary corridor. It means they're not asking for authorization, Vorithkes said. It means the question of whether to respond has already been answered, and they're asking us for logistics support, not permission. She kept her voice level because the information required a level voice. It means that 700 years ago, the ceasefire ended something that had begun to define the humans, and the humans have been making sure it stayed ended, quietly, without announcement, for 7 centuries. And now someone has broken it by killing the person they trusted to maintain it. And the humans have decided, not are deciding, have decided, that this is not a diplomatic event. What is it? Vorithkes thought about the 3 sentences in the headerless transmission. She thought about the cold, deliberate stripping of protocol from a message that announced a killing. She thought about a woman who had spent 11 years in a hostile diplomatic sphere, who had understood everything about what she was doing and why, who had written 342 reports that together added up to a single argument that she had never stated directly because she had not needed to state it. Because the humans knew it. Because they had always known it. It's personal, Vorithkes said. The Earth Council's formal communication arrived at the Compact's receiving array 14 minutes later. It was not, as Vorithkes had expected, a declaration. It was a notification. 1 page, 11 sentences, written in the precise and unornamented language of people who have no interest in making their position sound larger than it is because the position is already as large as anything they have ever stated. It said that the Earth Governance Council formally notified the Compact of its intention to pursue independent response to the confirmed killing of Envoy Lien Su, a citizen of Earth, a servant of the Compact, and the sole human diplomatic presence in the Drath Empire's territorial boundary corridor. It said that the Earth Council considered the killing a direct act of hostility requiring direct response and that it did not consider the Compact's diplomatic response framework adequate for the nature of the act. It said that Earth requested the Compact's vessels be cleared from the boundary corridor within 72 hours and that Earth would assume full operational responsibility for what followed. It said that the Earth Council was not seeking Compact military support and would not accept a Compact mandate to stand down. The final sentence said, "We are going to bring her home." Vorithkes read it twice. The second time she caught what she had missed in the first reading. They were not going to bring her home from the Empire. She was already dead. They were going to bring her home from where the Empire had left her, in the boundary corridor, in a place that belonged to the ceasefire she had spent 11 years maintaining. They were going in to retrieve her body. That was the response. Not a fleet action. Not an ultimatum. A retrieval. She thought about the strategic calculus the Empire's successor council would apply to this information. She thought about the way they had characterized human diplomatic presence as insignificance, as minimum investment, as a gesture of low priority. She thought about a faction that had looked at 700 years of quiet, consistent, personally invested human presence and had read it as irrelevance. She thought about what they were about to discover it actually was. The Compact's vessels began clearing the boundary corridor within 2 hours of the Earth Council's notification, which was 32 hours faster than the 72-hour request, because when an institution receives a communication that makes the situation's urgency perfectly clear, the people within it find ways to move faster than the timeline requires. Orvithsal coordinated the clearance from the council chamber and sent Vorithkes a single line of text rather than a call. "Stay on the signals desk. I need you reading everything that comes through that corridor." Vorithkes did not leave the signals room. She ate at her desk. She slept for 4 hours on the floor beside her station, using her jacket as a pillow, because she was not leaving, and the chair was not designed for sleeping, And the floor was not worse than remaining alert and missing something. The first signal from the Earth vessels came through 11 hours after clearance was confirmed. It was a position report, routine, exactly formatted, the kind of signal that convoy vessels send at regular intervals to confirm operational status. There was nothing unusual in the content. What was unusual was the number of position signals included in the transmission. Vorithkes ran the count 3 times to make sure her math was right. 47 vessels. She had not expected 47 vessels. The Earth Council's notification had described an independent response and had not requested compact military support, which she had interpreted as a relatively contained operation, a small number of ships moving into the corridor to retrieve the envoy under the implicit threat of escalation if interfered with. 47 vessels was not a retrieval escort. 47 vessels was a statement that had been dressed in the language of a retrieval escort and could not, from the outside, be immediately distinguished from one. She stared at the count. She thought about something Lien Su had written in year 7 of her posting, in a context that had seemed at the time like a stylistic digression, the kind of observation that appears in diplomatic reports when the author is thinking through something tangentially connected to the primary content. She had written, "The Empire's strategic doctrine assumes that the scale of a response is proportional to the scale of the stated grievance. They have never encountered a species that scales its response to something other than the stated grievance." Vorithkes looked at the 47 position signals. She called Orvithsal. 47 vessels, she said when the warden answered. The pause. "We know. The council is—" "The Empire's doctrine assumes proportionality," Vorithkes said. "They killed one person. By their calculus, a proportional response is 1 or 2 vessels, a formal recovery operation, an implicit threat of escalation to apply pressure. They know how to manage that. They have been managing proportional responses for 700 years. She paused. 47 vessels is not proportional to the killing of one envoy. There is no strategic framework in which it is proportional, which means the Empire's response modeling everything their successor council has planned for since they decided to break the ceasefire is already wrong. Orvithsal was quiet. They planned for a proportional response. They planned for the response that a compact member species would generate when one of its diplomatic personnel was killed, Vorithkes said. They have a model for that response. They spent 18 months building the model while they consolidated the successor council's power. They were confident in the model. She felt the cold clarity of the thing settling fully into place. The model doesn't account for the fact that the humans don't process this as a diplomatic incident. What do they process it as? Vorithkes thought about the final sentence of the Earth Council's notification. She thought about 11 years of reports. She thought about a woman who had understood something so completely that she had never needed to say it directly, and who had died in a corridor that she had spent 11 years making safe, and whose people were now moving through that corridor with 47 ships to bring her back. They process it as a debt, Vorithkes said. One that requires payment in kind, not in proportion. The Empire's response to the 47 vessels arrived 9 hours later through an authenticated channel, which meant they had switched from the deliberate protocol stripping of the assassination announcement back to formal diplomatic architecture, which meant they had received the vessel count and had decided that the formal framework was now in their interest. The communication requested an explanation of the Earth Council's operational presence in the boundary corridor and demanded that all Earth vessels stand down pending compact diplomatic review. It was, Vorithkes thought, a stall. They had expected a proportional response and had gotten 47 ships, and now they needed time to rebuild their model. The Earth Council's response arrived 4 minutes later. It was 2 sentences. The first said that the Earth Council's vessels were conducting a recovery operation for the remains of Envoy Lien Su and would continue until the recovery was complete. The second said, any interference with this operation will be interpreted as a second act of hostility and responded to accordingly. Not, may be interpreted. Not, could be construed. Will be interpreted. The boundary corridor was quiet for 6 hours. Vorithkes tracked the position signals from the Earth convoy, watching them move through the corridor at the slow, deliberate pace of vessels that are not trying to hide what they are doing or where they are going, And she thought about the successor council sitting in the Empire's capital working through the implications of everything that had happened in the last 48 hours. She thought about a faction that had spent 18 months consolidating power around a plan premised on the belief that breaking the ceasefire would generate a manageable response and had discovered, before the plan had even fully executed, that the premise was wrong. She thought about how a faction in that position responds. The answer arrived at hour 7. 3 Imperial vessels moved into the corridor from the Empire's side. Not armed posture, not intercept trajectory. They moved to a position that, in the corridor's spatial geometry, placed them between the Earth convoy and the location where Lien Su's vessel had last been registered. Not a blockade. A presence. A demonstration that the Empire had not conceded the corridor. The Earth convoy's formation changed. Vorithkes watched the position signals shift in real time and felt the cold quality return to her chest. 47 vessels had been moving in a standard convoy formation, 3 columns, evenly spaced, the configuration of ships on a stated humanitarian mission. The formation change was not aggressive. It was not a combat spread. It was something more unsettling than either, because it was a configuration she recognized from the Compact's historical military archives, from the records of engagements fought before the ceasefire, from the period that the humans had spent 700 years putting behind them. It was a retrieval escort formation. A configuration designed not for fighting through opposition but for maintaining access to a specific location regardless of what occupied the space between you and it. It said, "We are going through, and we are prepared for whatever that requires, and we are not going to stop." "They're not going around the Imperial vessels," Orvithsal said. She had arrived at the signals room at some point in the last hour and was standing behind Vorithkes looking at the position display. "They're going through them." "They're not going through them," Vorithkes said. "They're going to where they need to go, and the Imperial vessels are in the way. Those are different things." The distinction seemed small. It was not small. 3 hours of silence followed. Position signals from both sides, updating every 15 minutes, showing the Earth convoy's steady advance and the 3 Imperial vessels holding their position and the geometry between them becoming smaller with each update. Then the Imperial vessels moved. Not toward the convoy. Not away. They repositioned to the corridor's edge, opening the path, maintaining presence without maintaining obstruction. It was, Vorithkes thought, the minimum possible retreat. The successor council had looked at the formation change and the advance and the 2-sentence response and the 47 ships and had made a calculation about what interfering with a retrieval operation would generate, and the calculation had produced a number they were not prepared for. They stepped aside, Orvithsal said quietly. "For now," Vorithkes said. The Earth convoy reached the location 9 hours later. The recovery operation took 4 hours. The signals during those 4 hours were routine position confirmations and operational status updates, the language of a mission proceeding as planned. Vorithkes read every one of them. When the recovery was confirmed, the Earth Council's convoy reversed course and began the transit back through the corridor. 47 ships, same formation, same deliberate, unhurried pace. The 3 Imperial vessels held their position at the corridor's edge and did not move as the convoy passed. The formal notification from the Earth Council arrived at the Compact's receiving array while the convoy was still in transit. It was 3 paragraphs. The first confirmed the successful recovery of Envoy Lien Su's remains. The second formally closed the independent operational period and transferred situational authority back to the Compact's diplomatic framework. The third paragraph was the one that Vorithkes read 4 times. It said, "The Earth Council wishes to inform the Compact that during the recovery operation, a formal transmission was sent to the Drath Empire's successor council through authenticated diplomatic channels. The transmission stated the following. The ceasefire that has existed for 700 years was built and maintained by the people of Earth as a commitment made on behalf of every species the ceasefire protects. That commitment was not made lightly. It has not been maintained lightly. We have sent our people into your sphere for 7 centuries as evidence of that commitment, and we have never reduced that presence, and we have never asked you to acknowledge the cost of maintaining it. We are telling you now. The cost of ending it is not calculated in ships or resources or strategic position. It is calculated in what we are willing to do when you tell us it is over. Today you have seen part of that calculation. We suggest the successor council consider the rest of it carefully before making further decisions. Vorithkes finished reading. She sat at her desk in the signals room where she had been for 31 hours, and she looked at the words on her screen, and she thought about Lien Su's final report. What they do not yet understand is the cost of ending it. She thought about the woman who had spent 11 years in a hostile posting, who had understood this with complete clarity, who had been trying to tell the Compact's analysts what she knew in the precise and patient language of 342 reports that accumulated into a single truth. The humans had never, for 700 years, been doing only what it looked like they were doing. They had been maintaining something. Not a ceasefire. A promise. And the successor council had killed the person who carried it, and 47 ships had moved through the boundary corridor in retrieval formation, and 3 Imperial vessels had stepped aside, and the Compact's receiving array had just logged a transmission from the Earth Council that said, in the formal and unornamented language of people who do not need to make their position sound larger than it is, you have seen part of the calculation. Vorithkes thought about what the rest of it might be. She thought that the successor council was, at this moment, thinking about exactly the same thing. She thought that this was the first time in 700 years that the Empire had understood what the ceasefire had actually cost. Not in resources. Not in strategic position. In the specific, patient, unannounced investment of a species that had been maintaining a promise for 7 centuries and had never once been asked to prove how seriously they meant it. Until now. Until someone had looked at that commitment and called it irrelevance. Orvithsal left the signals room without speaking. The session chair would be reconvening the council. There was work to do, diplomatic architecture to reconstruct, a ceasefire to either rebuild or replace, a successor council to engage with the knowledge that the model they had built their strategy on was wrong in a way that could not be corrected without acknowledging how wrong it had been. Vorithkes pulled up a new document on her terminal. She began writing a summary of what she had observed, what she had read, what she had understood. Not for the council, Orvithsal would brief the council. For the Compact's long-term archive. For the analysts who would come after her and who would need, when they were trying to understand humans, to understand this moment in particular. She wrote for 2 hours. She was precise. She did not editorialize. She stated the facts in sequence and let the sequence carry what it needed to carry. In the summary's final paragraph, she wrote a single sentence, and she chose it with the same care she had been watching Lien Su choose sentences for 6 years, because some things need to be said exactly right or they don't say the right thing. She wrote, the Drath Empire ended the ceasefire believing they were removing a minor diplomatic inconvenience, and discovered instead that they had placed their hand into something that had been patient for 700 years specifically because it was waiting to be tested. She submitted the summary. She closed the document. She looked at the signals display one more time, at the 47 position signals moving steadily through the boundary corridor toward home, carrying what they had come for. Then she turned off her screen, and she sat in the quiet of the signals room, and she thought about a woman who had understood everything, who had tried to say so, who had not made it back.